AI is making us dumber. And this time it isn't just a clickbait, it's a real research. So together with Paul, our head of data and AI at MKDev, we unpack this research. In Microsoft's study on hundreds of employees, the more people trust AI, the less they switch on critical thinking. And in MIT's essay task, the LLM group flunked memory. Most of them couldn't even recall a single quote, and 100% of them made errors. That's our everyday offloading in action. The easier it gets, the less effort we invest. Ergo, AI is making us dumber. So, what can we do about it? Today, we break down why moving from seeker to curator is risky without real expertise, why human in the loop is self-deception unless you have proper logging, monitoring, and reevaluation, and how to reason with error budgets. My name is Leo Sushiv. I'm the co-founder from MKDev, where we help companies with AI literacy, processes, data constraints, data quality, and the safe adoption of Gen AI. And this is DevOps Accents, where we cut through the AI DevOps noise with practical, no bullshit conversation about data, platforms, and real-world workflows, so you can ship faster without burning trust or budgets. Subscribe to DevOps Accents and our newsletter. Links in the description. Let's go.
Welcome to DevOps Accents, a podcast on everything around DevOps, public cloud, and cloud-native topics, with your hosts, Pablo, Leo, and Kirill.
Hey Paul, thanks for joining me today. I really like having you not just as a co-host, but as a guest again. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. Exciting topics that you've picked out for us today.
Yeah, so you already know that we are going to discuss the way AI is making us dumber, to put it this way, and we will discuss if it's actually as critical as it sounds. You already know there were a number of studies and research and concerning articles across the medium recently, and I've been reading some of them. I've been publishing my thoughts about that in the intro for our dispatch, MKDev Dispatch newsletter. If you're not subscribed to it, make sure to be subscribed, linked in the description. So I was discussing this in one of the intros, and I gave my overview for that and some thoughts on top of that. And there are actually two researchers. One of them is from Microsoft, and another is from MIT. And there are many others. We will also discuss. We will discuss them. So let's go straight to the point. The moment AI takes over a chunk of our mental work, it feels easier, and that's exactly where critical thinking quietly gives up its ground. And not because people got worse, but because the brain saves efforts. Unfortunately, this is the way how our brain works. And in a recent Microsoft study, they ran it on their own employees. I will give this short overview for our listeners so that you don't have to read all those papers. So they checked how often people actually engage critical thinking when AI, artificial intelligence, helps them. And there are no hard ruler that measures grams of critical thinking, so they used validated metrics, psychometric scales, and not just like on, off, if you're engaged with critical thinking or not. But they create detailed measures of engagement and verification. So bottom line, in human terms, the higher you trust in artificial intelligence, the less you fully switch on your own head. In practice, it looks like AI helped me, it's fine. And cross-checking or comparing sources gets postponed for later and often never happens. Have you ever noticed similar behavior when you are engaging with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think the risk is real, but it's also important to look at it in with kind of a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, so you mentioned cognitive load, and one of the things that this is actually why people that are saying, hey, you should use these AI coding engines are saying it'll reduce your cognitive load so you can focus on the really important things. And what you're talking about is slightly different. It's like a total offloading, not just that. So I think like one maybe way to think about this is people will say that good code design of whatever software you're using is a way of reducing cognitive load. So I personally, the first capital model I was responsible for, my first job in industry after leaving academics, I was responsible for a really, really complicated MATLAB series of MATLAB scripts. And there was very little scope for various reasons. I mean, a really good team, great experience, very little scope to really clean this up, reduce the cognitive load, restructure the code. And at some point I thought, do I want my expertise as okay, back then I was a quantitative analyst, but now a future kind of data scientist, developer. Do I want my do I want to be training my brain in working with this very complicated, suboptimally implemented code that required a lot of cognitive load? It was a lot of, oh, okay, I have to remember everything that happened in this other, 300 to 1,000 line script and keep that in mind before I change anything here. And so you have, on the one hand, you have this kind of good code design and writing modular code using descriptive variable names, encapsulation, all these other things are supposed to decrease cognitive load, which we generally think is a good thing. So, I mean, how do you match these two things that you don't want to just, you know, I don't want to go back to being an expert in some crazy MATLAB thing just to keep my brain sharp. And maybe it's that, as you kind of hinted at this about this, maybe the answer, what you hinted at, is what's your attitude towards the responses you get. So, like the thing with trying to write code, whether it's you doing it with your own fingers or however, or with Gen AI that reduces cognitive load, that's engaging this kind of higher order, or I mean, whatever it's called, critical thinking, right? That you're developing your own critical thinking, your own mental models, and it's almost like, I mean, how the brain really works, I don't pretend to know exactly, but the way it feels to me is that it's like, okay, I have these I have these mental models that are connected, and I can just say, okay, this goes in here, and I only have to kind of go in and think about this if there's something wrong with the internal workings. But to understand the whole system that I'm trying to design, AI system, data pipeline, whatever, I can just keep at this kind of higher level. So it's a bit of it's still thinking critically, but it's thinking kind of a bit in a more complicated way. So kind of hierarchical, how do things fit together? And I think that's an area where, um, like if you're talking about knowledge work, that AI can kind of be an assistance, right? If you just need to write a few more test cases, or you have to create some very standard implementation, then you can keep this higher level thinking going faster and get to your goal a bit faster by offloading some of the work to AI. Like in research tasks, I think you have this too, to a degree. I've had quite limited, I've been quite underwhelmed with this, deep research, I think they still call it that, feature that people came out about half a year ago. It just doesn't do, okay, yeah, sure, I could spend more time trying to optimize my prompts, whatever, um, but then if there's certain atomic little things like going to perplexity, like I know that there's some source about here somewhere, and then going back and checking, I think that's key. But now getting it back to your point, I think what is scary, the two things that are scary about this are, if you're not taking this kind of more critical approach to AI, you're taking more this AI is magic. Wow, isn't this amazing? And you're just, rubber stamping. Um, that to me, I don't see how that can lead to anything other than cognitive decline. And secondly, who's watching the quality of what you're doing? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to, if there isn't if there are still, I mean, maybe we'll reach this day at some point when you don't have to have this, I mean, any human oversight. But for now, I think that the design, or at least saying that you need to have tests and some, so who's going to be able to perform that function if we've just offloaded everything to AI?
Yeah. So there is like this ideal picture. AI works and I supervise, and someone else supervises what I do. It might sound good on paper, but in reality, it's more often turns into AI works and I believe it. I even have a number of examples from my daily routine, not necessarily connected to job, but for my everyday AI use. For example, I delegated it to develop a skincare routine for me. I just send it all the details about my skin. I send it pictures. I describe it past history with visiting doctors, what they were saying. And here the website for the pharmacy and the website for DM. You know, these markets are all across Europe, German.
Oh, I love DM. I shouldn't say that. No endorsement implied. But I'm glad that Slovenia also has DM. They're not
Okay,
a
yeah. So
sponsor of
no
MKDev.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
It's
with
just
you. I'm with you.
yeah. So and I just sent them the links and I said, based on what you learned about me, create this routine and what I can go and buy in this nearest store. And it created. And then I started checking. At first glance, it was perfect, right? It's calculated precisely every detail, the type of the texture of the skin, and it even explained me the ingredients, why it was looking for a certain ingredients, and everything's great. But then you start digging deeper and you discover that it's kind of superficial, because it picks basically the first search result that it finds that meets its criteria, and then you start digging deeper, and this is where it should go deeper. So you have to take this response from it and start cherry picking on it, and challenging it into explaining, why did you pick that, you didn't pick that, and okay, in the end there was still a lot of work to fine tune the result.
To validate it and fine tune. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was so happy and I was so glad it helped me, and it does really great job with easier tasks, with cooking recipe or things like that. And that's a normal human psychology where we avoid extra cognitive load. This is how our brain works, because the brain consumes a lot of energy, and the less energy it can consume, if it can reduce the amount of energy it spends, it's always happy to do that. That's why we love to sleep so much.
Or if you can avoid context switching, right?
Yeah.
You know, or you can do this thing that isn't essential. Look, you could spend your evenings clicking through these things, becoming an expert, but rather than taking up your free time, sure. Yeah. You delegate this to some large language model.
Yeah. But the issue isn't the tools, is that we stop using our own head exactly where it is needed. And there was another study conducted by MIT that I covered in this newsletter. So what they did, they created 3 groups, and this study is even more concerning. So they created 3 groups, and they tasked them to write an essay. And there were 3 groups. Brain only group, they were allowed to use only their brain, their own memory, without any additional sources or anything else. Another group is Google allowed, so they're allowed to Google to find sources, anything. And the third group, LLM and ChatGPT allowed group. And while writing essays, participants were like EAG. Afterwards, they were asked to retell in their own words what they themselves had just written. And results, as on in this study.
Recall of what you just did. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the brain Google groups, about 90% reproduced the content adequately. In the large language models group, 83 could not reproduce even a single quotation. 83%. And 100% responded with errors.
Yeah, sure.
The LLM groups had no accurate retell at all. And when participants were moved from LLM back to brain, the quality of their text remained worse than it was when they were in the brain only group. So the thing is, at first they started at brain only group, they wrote great essay, then they switched to LLM group, they create a bad essay, and then they switch back to brain only, and they produce worse results. So the habit of outsourcing doesn't vanish overnight. And then they were studying, they were looking deeper into their brains, and what they discovered is the concerning and the rapid speed how our engrams are disappeared. You know this term, and those who work with data, you know those engrams, but this term actually comes from biology, when neurons are creating connections, and then when they create a strong connection, creating this memory, and this like a chunk of connection, a chunk of memory called engram. And those engrams, they can disappear. And in those engrams, we store our skills, memory, things like that. And then they disappear, and you have to create new engrams in order to return, to get back to where you were before you start using large language models. And this is scary, because this means that we actually are getting dumber while we are using ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah, I think again, I mean, add a bit of, I think there's definitely that risk, and I think the default position is probably what you're describing. And here, I think it's important to differentiate according a few axes, and the importance of this differentiation is that we're making conscious decisions in how we use technology, not just this default. Because if you just go with the default of just using it, then you're going to be living according to what generates the most ad revenue and the most statistics for these companies to get more VC funding, right? Which often is not aligned with what's actually best for you as an individual and what's best for society. So I think it's always about making conscious decisions. And this is where I'm not the only person, but I kind of identify myself as neo-Amish. And Amish is this old order from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, actually not far from where I grew up. We would get produce from Amish farmers. And the point is that they didn't just reject technology. It's that Amish as a community would make conscious decisions. Hey, what are the pros? What are the cons? What does this mean for me as an individual? What does this mean for us as a community? And that's how they would decide to engage with, or how to engage with technology or not. So for example, you'd have a payphone. Most Amish communities would decide to have a payphone, but not in the individual houses, but within reach in case they have to call emergency services. Another example is the produce that we would buy in suburban Philadelphia from these Amish farmers. They didn't have their own trucks because they just used animal power. They didn't have mechanized power, but they were fine paying their neighbors to help them transport their produce, right? So it's not they were totally against technology, it's how you use it. And the analogy would be, you have a child and you say, okay, when you come home from school, we put the phone away and you don't use this. So it's not saying no, never use it. I mean, maybe you should do that actually, depending on the age of the child, but it's about a conscious use. And so back to your point, is it making us stupider? And this MIT study. So I think this also gets back to where do we as individual society, where do we want to keep and develop our smarts, our mental capabilities, and where is it okay to let it go? So I personally, I don't want to become an expert on skincare. So I think your usage of doing this is fine, right? You could get some really nasty rash if you're not careful. You probably end up spending too much money. But so it's two things. Where do you want where do you want to develop as a person? What's important to you to keep and develop your cognitive function? And secondly, where is there a low error budget? A very generous error budget, a high one. Yeah, what's the worst that could happen? You get a rash, but how likely is that? We live in Europe. There's some regulation controlling what products they can sell and can't sell. So you have a pretty big error budget there. When it comes to education and what you're describing is MAT studies describing, this I think we have a pretty small error budget. This is a really important thing. And if it's core cognitive capabilities like formulating arguments, doing your own kind of discriminating research, and this is something that I am totally with you. And I think the scary things, the MIT study, this is concerning. There's an article in The Atlantic recently from a high school student saying AI has killed my high school education. And she writes how, she hasn't been using it, but her classmates, and actually I've heard this from my daughter too, some of her classmates, they just copy paste it into ChatGPT, pass it off as their own. So this, I think, they're getting away with it to a large degree, and also because these tools to detect AI usage are not reliable. What are you going to do there? But she feels, the way my daughter uses it is sometimes for research, sometimes to explain something, but she uses it to like quiz her and basically test her own understanding of things, to come up with potential exam questions that then she can then try to answer herself. So I think you're right that there should be a concern level there, and especially in education. And actually, I'm going to be teaching in the Berlin School of Economics in October, and they've gone totally back to in class final examinations. People have to write in these blue books or whatever, these special notebooks, and because you just can't trust that the students are actually engaging with the material and learning the material that the university owes them and they owe themselves anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is nice that you brought this up, because the study shows that in typical cognitive studies, older adults are the risk groups, but with the AI, it actually flips.
Yeah.
So younger people, they're at risk. And the fair question, maybe it's just that people with weaker critical thinking run to AI, and AI isn't the cause. I think partially yes, but in other experiments, right, that I described, people were assigned to use AI, and the picture was similar once you get used to outsourcing the heavy lifting. Your own thinking muscle works less. It's not just initial differences. It's also a habit. Like in the gym, right? You always take the escalator, your legs won't get stronger. So I don't want to moralize here, but it's about habits.
No, it's about habits, but it's also about things that are pretty well established in cognitive science and what this means. So another factoid that I'm pretty sure is true, it's also from my daughter, but that your prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until your early 20s. So your brain isn't formed, and that there are a lot of, we can maybe see if we can have him as a guest on a future podcast, but Eric Strumbel, who's a computer science professor here in Ljubljana.
Skepticism muscle is weak.
Well, no, but he's been really assessing these cognitive effects, and his group is looking at across a bunch of different research. He's also personally interested in this, and I think with children, what you described for these people doing these, I guess, adults doing these MIT studies, and we also, before we started, there's also this article in the Lancet journal about, I think it's endocrinologists, so some type of doctor specialists. And this is pre LLM days, that they use an AI tool for diagnostics for 3 months, and then they stop, and their diagnostic capabilities have gone down appreciably. I mean, it's something like their error rate goes up by 5% or something. So it's not, maybe it's not dramatic, but it's appreciable and concerning. So this is for adults, which supposedly what happens if what you mentioned before is true, they have to reconstruct these engrams. If it's with children whose brains haven't fully developed, this I don't know for sure, but I think there's definitely reason to be concerned. I'm sure there's research that maybe it's not game over, but how do you recoup for this missed brain development?
Yeah, but again, we've seen this before, right? So let's take the Google era. We have already watched cognitive habits change when a super convenient tool arrives. Search engines have already rewired us in a way like there is no point of return. We're way beyond that, and we remember less content, thing like that. So the older generation, you and I, right? So we remember we used to memorize friends' phone numbers.
Yeah, I still know my best friend from elementary school's phone number.
Yeah, I remember. So, but when I was thinking about that, I realized that I remember only my own number, my partner's phone number, and my mom's phone number, and my old home landline phone number, and that's it. Now the memory moved into the phone, right? And with the AI, it's just the next step. We don't just fail to remember, we stop building our own chains and accept pre-built ones. And do you think it's the reality we will like we have to embrace it and have to, okay, we will get a little bit dumber, but we will be doing more with that?
No, I think the point is you absolutely don't have to embrace it. I mean, that's this default position that plays into the interests of the people making money off of this. Yeah, and things like I mean, I'm a capitalist. I'm not saying you get rid of these companies, but I think it's definitely important to recognize, hey, what are their interests and what are my interests as an individual data scientist, programmer, as a parent, whatever. And I think it's definitely this is the biggest lie about technological process. And I have a master's in history of science and technology, so this isn't just okay, it was a 1-year course. I don't have a PhD, but it's something that I've studied quite a bit. The biggest lie is that it's inevitable. Like this march of progress, it's always about human choices, and we always have choices. Of course, sometimes some choices are harder. If you're up against a company whose valuation is $1 trillion, then yeah, it's going to be harder for one or two people. But you see things that attorney generals from 40 different United States have signed letters expressing concern, and I think demanding action too, of these character AI, Meta, I think Google's in there, about concerns about children usage of these chat things. So that's people saying, hey, this isn't inevitable. And this is part of, democracy, also in capitalism, that you say, hey, this is something that we don't want to, this is too big of a risk. We don't want this, whether it's to risk to children. Okay, that's on the massive macro level. But I think what you're saying also on the micro level is this just inevitable that my brain will I'll become less able to remember things? And there I also take things like I've tried to I cycle as much as possible, and I try to not use, okay, Google Maps has gotten worse anyway, but even Apple Maps, because it's just the way that you think about it, you lose. I realize I've lose this ability, and I think what you were saying about like memorizing stuff, this is exactly the type of claim or mental activity that people on the tech side that are selling this technology would say, oh, come on, this is not the critical thinking of the future. You shouldn't have to memorize things. It's about, soft skills. It's about creativity. It's about other things. My second year of introductory physics, it was modern physics at William and Mary. Let's see, AOL existed. Google, I think I only started using Google a couple of years after that. But we had email, we had the internet, and our physics professor made us memorize physical constants, Planck's constant, speed of light, distance from the moon to the sun, distance from the earth to the sun. He made us actually visualize, like an orange, these three-dimensional coordinates. This is one of our exercises, right? And part of his thinking, which I think is still valid today, this even this higher level critical thinking, it needs kind of anchor points to be able to work on the right stuff, and also to be able to even get into any sort of flow. If you're constantly, like, his reason was, look, if you just know these numbers, then you have an idea of how to solve the problem, and you just march, you just go through it. You're not messing up the flow of your higher order thinking to, let me check my calculator, let me do this. You can get this flow and really engage in this higher order thinking in a better way, compared to, let me Google this. Like, how much time do you spend, with your thumbs looking up something? Whereas if you, not everything, but stuff that really matters to you. I think coding is a great example, right? I don't want to have to look up everything from the Python standard library. It's just a lot faster. We can be super fast. Like, these motions that we do with typing, with clicking, whatever, are super fast compared to saying something or listening to something.
Do you think your project infrastructure is well set and maintained? We know for sure there is always room for improvement. If you are uncertain where to begin, let's first do an audit of what you already have. We will review your setup from every angle: performance, cost, security, high availability, and automation, and provide you with a detailed roadmap of which direction your infrastructure should go, generate concrete tasks for you to implement, or even take on your infra entirely, if you let us, of course.
I think the way you speak about it gives me ideas about the impact on businesses, because it affects us individually, and then it affects businesses because people are starting using these tools on their workplaces. And we can think about seeker and curator. We can try to wrap up our work routine into the seeker curator pattern. Like, we used to search, we used to analyze and build arguments on our own ourselves. Now we more often assemble, compile, and polish what the artificial intelligence brings to us. And in the same study in Microsoft, an important detail, there was an important detail. At first, we still doubt and double check everything that AI gives us. But the longer we use AI and see it's fine, the more often we trust by default and stop rereading critically. The facade gets prettier, but the internal logic can sag. And this affects our brains and our working output, business outputs that we generate. Because the longer we use AI, the more complex tasks we delegate to it. And I think that creation is a legitimate layers of work, but you can only touch up the surface, because when you can do that when you are already have deep competence in that. Otherwise, you just repaint the facade without checking the load bearing beams. And I think this is where the very important thing that a lot of businesses need to consider when they introduce artificial intelligence, LLM helpers, agents into their businesses. They need to think how this affects their people. And we need to come up with some solution, with some guidance for them to make sure that we do not harm. We do that with that we do more good with introducing LLMs than harm. Remember, you were talking about, and we were talking about in the previous podcast episode about AI literacy, right? So for the companies, and I think that this part is the most important part for the AI literacy. So you have to be aware that AI not just can hallucinate, right? but your brain will start. You will start losing your brain skill capacities.
Yeah. I think one thing that I wanted to, I don't remember the reference for this. I have to find it up and then we can maybe add it to the notes. But it was another study where it looked at how what you brought up at the beginning is, hey, are you going to be a person that just accepts what comes out of an AI, or are you going to be someone who engages with it critically? And what you just said is that, okay, maybe even if you start with engaging with it critically, over time, if your job is a human in the loop to just, babysit AI, this level of how critically you're evaluating doesn't surprise me. You would just expect it to go down and down and down. And but in this study, yeah, I have to find the reference. The kind of the headline was, the people who consider AI as magic, for them it's just, man, this is so cool. That's just magic how this works. They tend to engage with the outputs less critically, whereas the people that have some kind of AI literacy, and ideally this literacy of course, not understanding completely under the hood, but that, hey, look, there are certain components that go in. There's always some historical data that these models have been trained on. There's always some complex procedure that's really it's mathematical, but it's hard to understand, that determines, okay, what's the best value for these parameters that control this AI model. And there's always a bunch of human decisions that go into, how did you pick the data to train on? What's the architecture for your model? What do you do with the inputs before it goes in outputs? So I think this type of getting people beyond this AI is magic is really key. But another point you bring up, and this, I think some people, it sounds so good, but I think what you bring up is another reason to say that this just isn't enough. People say, yeah, of course, Gen I makes mistakes. That's why it should always be augmenting humans, and you should always have human in the loop. So there are at least two problems with this. One is human in the loop. If you're having your job to babysit software and babysit a computer is totally opposite of why businesses like computers in the first place, right? You like computers because they do mathematical operations and you don't have to check them. If there's a mistake because the way you specified the problem or implemented it is wrong. Okay, or very rarely there's something wrong in the compiler level, whatever. And this, I mean, starting from the usage of personal computers and computers in business settings, even before personal computers, this is the value of kind of computers and software for business, is that you don't have to babysit it. You shouldn't have to babysit it. So I think on the one hand, if you take these tasks that you're describing, that somebody starts checking it, and after a while they determine, look, it always gives a good enough answer. Okay, there are things you have to do to secure this a bit. As long as you have a pretty big error budget, the cost of getting something wrong is big enough. Then I think you let it run. You have your monitoring, you have your alerts, and what you do is you log your outputs. And then it's not just a person every time saying, yes, was the AI right? Yes or no. Then you can statistically have somebody go back and check at regular intervals. Okay, has the model performance degraded? Does it look as good before? And so this is more leaving this chat mode, which everybody's kind of been in, or most businesses have been in since 2023, and moving into more machine learning evaluation mode. I mean, this is what we've been doing for decades, right? And this is how I think businesses should be. If it's a task where you say, hey, looks like the output is good enough from generative AI, and instead of making a person's job to check the outputs all day, you set this up like a proper machine learning evaluation, logging and monitoring, and you evaluate it at intervals to make sure that your AI model, in this case a large language model, is still behaving well. But now, if we get back to what I think your main point is, and that's about these things where what the model is doing is the core competence of the company, right? So if this is a core competence of the company, and if you have a small error budget, if getting things wrong is really expensive, then I think you're probably right. You'd have to find ways, and let's say the benefit of AI is, so like, let's say law firms. Law firms, they have to do some really voluminous research, know these things, and if they make a mistake, it can be a disaster preparing this, right? Even so, having the ability to have Gen AI do some of this pouring through documents for you, or these, semantic search, uh, for these things, it's high risk, but you can still get high efficiency gains, probably high enough, with human in the loop, with this augmentation. And there, I mean, what you're describing, I think there probably will be a need. How do you keep the humans, the lawyers, how do you avoid what happened to these doctors? That they rely on it and their competence goes down. And that means they're less able to challenge or to look for or gaps or mistakes that they're getting from their AI tooling.
But anyway, even if it works, how far can you scale this approach? Because I can imagine companies, from our experience, smaller companies, they tend to use artificial intelligence more like a gimmick to replace some people, to augment their workplaces with an extra capabilities. But the companies who tend to use artificial intelligence as a power tool are larger companies, and they operate with enormous amount of data, and they invite artificial intelligence to do that. And is there a way to scale the process to this level that at some point you can release the leash and stop double checking everything that artificial intelligence produce for you? Is it even possible?
So what you described right, this is kind of super high level, what you're saying, that you just unleash AI on enterprise data. I mean, this you shouldn't do for a number of reasons. One of which is if you're dependent at all upon understanding where, if these results are correct, where they came from, then you have basically no way of debugging, of validating, of whatever. But I think the real question is, what you then said at the end, which is, okay, given that, what I said in one of our blog posts about generative AI and cyber risk, IT security risk, that, if you have normal computer program, you think of that as deterministic logic, kind of classical machine learning or non-Gen AI large language models, you think of as fuzzy logic. This was in the 90s, a big revolution. It's not 100% yes, this is an example of claims fraud, and 0% no. It's not switching yes, claims fraud with 100% no, it's not claims fraud. Or let's say, money launder, know your customer for a bank. Yes, this is a fraudulent customer. Don't give them an account. No, it isn't. But it's okay. Look, 75%, we're pretty sure it's a fraudulent customer, or it's a fraudulent insurance claim. 25% not. This is this fuzzy logic. Now with Gen AI, especially these large language models, so generative AI has been around for a long time, but especially in terms of these really massive Gen AI models, this is what I've kind of been calling fuzzy wuzzy logic. So it's not just fuzzy, it's fuzzy wuzzy. Are you really going to be able to pin down that this is doing exactly what you need it to do? So let's take your example of kind of this, how would we break down your kind of vision of unleashing a massive Gen AI model on enterprise data? And I think that, I still stand by what I said, you don't. There are companies that are doing this, but they're doing this with for limited kind of standard use cases. So Jure Leskowitz's Kumo is about graph neural networks, and you kind of plug in the enterprise data into their engine. But they've done a lot of work. And what I've seen so far, I'm sure they're expanding this, is that they're doing this on fairly, it's still super impressive, but standard use cases that aren't, have a pretty big error budget. So it's going to be about lead management. It's going to be about cross-sell, upsell. So it's not going to be something like super business critical, at least what they're offering so far. I'm sure they're working on this. But the point is that it's really, to harness this fuzziness and fuzzy wuzziness is really hard. So I think that the two things to do, one is that, but that said, there's still an enormous amount of potential. Yeah, and I think especially in data areas, and this is where I've been focusing a lot lately, and it's kind of in two directions. One direction is to use generative AI tooling to actually implement these rigorous data practices faster and better and at scale. So what do I mean by rigorous data practices? That you're actually doing something like data contracts or managing data expectations, that the data that's coming in is really matching what everything downstream expects it. So one reason not to do this, why people haven't done this in the past, is that you just have to write extra code to do it. Big deal, right? This is something, as long as you get the Gen AI, you give it constraints, you give it examples, it can write these codes, it can create these things that a human then can go back and check. And then, of course, you do this with tests. You want to have automated test suite to make sure this is correct. But if it's just about producing a volume of code that's very well defined, the Gen AI tooling is really good at, and you can check it later. You're not dependent. It doesn't matter at the end of the day whether it was Claude or Gemini or whatever, Mistral that came up with this, or an offshore team in the Philippines or Malawi. It doesn't matter. You have the code. It's your responsibility, and you can check it. So I think that's the one. And then the other thing is then using this, whether it's Gen AI tooling or not, to make sure that the data that you're feeding into whatever AI models, that this is of better quality. So it's kind of AI for data and better data for AI. I think these are the two areas. Maybe a last thing. So how do you do this? If you're a normal company and you're not a company that's building a solution like Kumo that they're selling to enterprise, but if you're a normal company that just wants to use this stuff effectively, then you don't go for big problems. You find, hey, where along my value chain can I use this responsibly? And this means that you have to know, okay, for this use case, what's your error budget? How bad is it if things are wrong? You want to set up automated testing, CI/CD, all these things that MKDev can help you get started with. So it's really an example of, I think when we started with this excitement about, okay, now we're getting off the topic of the cognitive load, but actually it's relevant, because when like this other MIT study that showed that 95% of Gen AI initiatives never make it past POC, right? What this is partly showing is that just throwing Gen AI at a problem rarely works. So just throwing Gen AI at your data or at your sales pipeline, and that the expertise that people like we have, for people like us, this is how you're going to get the most value out of this Gen AI, is to know how to control the fuzziness where you can't completely control it, how you can monitor it and have a rigorous monitoring framework to give you a quick alert, hey, something's gone off the rails.
Yeah. And let's get closer to earth with examples that are more relevant to our listeners, engineers, developers, and especially their managers, because we need to understand that the everyday use of Gen AI now, this is happening a lot. This happens at MKDev. We love Claude, and fantastic tool. a lot of developers I personally know, they use code generators extensively. But we now, knowing these studies, that we now know that this actually affects the way we think. It actually affects our brains. And if we could write something on our own, sitting there without looking into uh, any hints or any notes, write a good chunk of code and make it run and cover it with tests. Now we delegate this task to Gen AI, and we might find ourselves in a position that in a few months we won't be able to write the same code that we could just 2 months ago. It can be reality, and a lot of people should be aware about this. There is a possibility for that. No matter how hard we try to oversee and pretend that we know better, we can read this code, there is a fact. Ingrams got erased. This is happening. What can we do with that? Are there any advices for the managers, for the directors, for them how to structure their job with their own developers, with their engineers? Let's try to create this list.
Managers of technical teams, you mean?
Yeah,
Sure.
Or for yourself, if you are independent developer, what can you do to prevent this happening to you? One thing I can think of is, for example, explicitly labeled task where you must think yourself. Like when you plan that you need to do something, you say, okay, I do that, AI will do this. So for example, planning, checking premises, risk assessment, you do this all on your own always. So this is one example that I can think of. What are the others?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I do personally, is that I've come up with certain things that I often delegate, and other things where I know, no, I need to do this thinking. I have to go up to a whiteboard. You can't see it behind me because of the background, but I need to go to a whiteboard and just think about something.
So basically you are dosing, offloading. You sketch your own skeleton first, and then you blend AI in.
Yeah, and it depends. I think it wasn't exactly the studies that you've cited and brought up, but I also made the decision. I started using Cursor, I think because Kirill actually had such a great experience with it over a year ago.
Yeah.
And at first it was great, but one of the decisions I made was, okay, do I let Cursor take over my normal IDE shortcut? So otherwise I use Visual Code. If I write code dot, open up my code editor in this terminal folder, do I make it always Cursor? I said, no, I'm going to keep the two separate. And after 3 days, I was glad I did, because one thing I also do, I do this. There's certain projects. Actually, this is exactly what you're saying. Like, if it's about me writing something, like writing our blog posts for MKDev, this I always do in a plain code editor, because I don't want, of course, I'll use Perplexity sometimes to check things. I want this to be my voice. I don't want this to be some generic averaged Gen AI coming out. So this I do in my normal code editor. But if it's some task where I know that, hey, some inline factoring, like these things, these agentic tools, that's exactly what I need, then I'll use Cursor, right? And use this instead. So I do this for myself. I've been managing teams since, actually, before I freelanced was the last time managing teams was just when ChatGPT was going viral. So end of 2022, start of 2023. And there everybody was just using it in the chat interface, right? Or no, actually that's not true. Some people are for coding purposes. But that's another thing, is that sometimes actually just forcing myself to use this chat interface on a different browser, because then instead of this lazy, just pick up whatever context I have in my code base, that forces me to explain afresh to the large language model in this chat web interface, okay, what is essential about my task? What is it I'm really trying to do? What are some other particular specifics that I have elsewhere in the code base that really aren't essential to where I could use some support or generate some code. So I think those of us that are really using it and like you said, are haven't drunk the Kool-Aid. We know it's not magic. We know it can be a real efficiency, efficiency win, but it can also be just sink you down rabbit holes if you're not careful. I think all of us are kind of coming up with our own ways of getting some efficiency, the key efficiency gains, but also keeping ourselves expert at what we're doing. And maybe last thing, maybe you had this too. I'm not the only person who's annoyed that these reasoning models have become the default. Andrew Karpathy also has a quote that, you just want a quick answer. Just give me GPT 4.1. Just give me Gemini Turbo 2.5. I just want a quick answer, because even waiting 5 seconds or 2 seconds for, let me craft my answer. Let me try to make you super happy with everything. All the research won't you be happy with me with these reasoning models that are often the current default. It's too slow, and it's faster for me to just Google it sometimes. Okay, you can, but I think that gets to, hey, really pay attention to how you develop best and what you need to be productive, and as you're saying, productive, on a given task in a day, but also over longer time periods.
I think the thinking mode is an answer to our biases. So we need to manage our own biases, and one of the biases is trust the machine. But because but by default, people trust other people less because everyone's paid off, things like that. I don't know, and they trust algorithm more because machine is objective, and it's a dangerous illusion. And we even have this meme. I don't know if you are aware of this. It came from X. Grok, is this true?
Yeah.
Whatever comes in your feed, there is always someone says, Grok explained it to me. Grok, is this true? To anything. And I hate this. But the thing is, the bot, the robot, so the AI is polite, not rude. It sounds confident, and our skepticism shuts off.
This is not an objective outcoming of how they're, trained on web data. This is a conscious design decision that could be different. Is that this post-processing to go from a foundational model to a chat model, instruct model, involves some extra prompt engineering, but also changing the parameters to give the answers that people on average like more, right? So this is not objective in the sense of, hey, the apple falling from the tree above Newton's head, which has probably never happened, but whatever. It's not some law of physics. This is a human decision that's been the models have been post-processed and changed to be complementary, to be polite, to be whatever. I mean, it still fails sometimes, but this is
Yeah, and there is a danger in it.
Yeah, this thing about the thinking, like this, I don't know if we have time for this today, but if you give a reason for something, there are different things, like the chain of thought and this idea of forcing a language model to go through certain steps in your instructions does have on benchmarks significant benefits, but there are also significant, and it can be super useful for debugging, but there's some real questions. We'll put the reference in the transcript too, but questions about how trustworthy these explanations are. And one other study, I just thought of it, so I don't have it, was had nothing to do with large language models. It's about how we deal with requests and whether or not an explanation is given for the request. And this was some psychology student experiment with physical people standing in the line at a photocopier machine. So, office of the 90s or turn of the millennium. And they found that if somebody rushed forward and said, "Oh, excuse me," so basically they wanted to see if the participants would let somebody get in line in front of you, right? And so the two groups, in the one group that was tested on this, the person that tried to cut in line said, Oh, please, excuse me, can you please let me in? No reason given. Yeah. And then they compile statistics. How often did that person get allowed to cut in front of the line? And the second group, the person came and said, oh, excuse me, could you please let me in? I have to make a photocopy. Gave a reason, but the reason was totally vacuous. So just giving a reason, if this study is legitimate, a lot of these psychology studies aren't so reproducible, but if it's legitimate, just giving some reason engenders trust, whether it's warranted or not.
Yeah. There is a big risk into it because neural network can defend obvious nonsense under the guise of logical chain, wrap it nicely, and we say, well, it has figured out. And then we can. So another, probably the final that I just thought of, the final advice for the developers and the managers how to defend yourself from cognitive loss is probably structure your work with artificial intelligence in a way that it is how to put it, that you study with this rather than you just take the answers for granted. So turn on study mode, ask artificial intelligence to explain itself, to show steps, not just give answers. And probably that will also extend your understanding of the matter.
Yes. But I think here then is on us to make the decision and to expend the effort. Are you really going to engage with that explanation, right? And then as long as you're engaging with it, really engaging and keep this discipline, then you're building up your own cognitive capabilities, your own mental models, you're expanding them. And that's my goal when I'm using these tools, is sometimes it's just to get some little stuff done, but other times it's to really learn and understand and poke at something so that then I have this knowledge becomes a part of my thinking capabilities.
I'm not a developer, and I will get back to my example with skincare routine.
Yeah.
But
it worked for you.
Yeah, it worked for me, and I'm sure you engineers will find your examples where you can do the same with the generated output. So I was asking about certain ingredients, what they are doing, why they're doing, and why do I need to apply this on my skin? How it actually works, and that I learned about retinoids. And the way how they're different. There is a retinol, retinol, and how they encapsulated and how they get inside of your skin and what they actually do there. And now I not just know that, okay, I need these kind of, for example, body lotion. I understand. I can find my own, because I can see what ingredients should be there and what ingredients I should avoid for different reasons.
You've used this output and your interaction to actually expand your cognitive, to learn something. You've learned something new about the world. Maybe you did some Google search, DuckDuckGo, to confirm, hey, this isn't just nonsense. But then this is I think the happy path, and it's worked for you.
Yeah, it worked for me, and I know there are ways for developers, for engineers, to make it work for them, like to become a better developers, not just because artificial intelligence magically did your job for you, but because it explains something to you, and now you better understand. You understand it better, and you produce a better result. And I think AI is fantastic exoskeleton for your brain, right? But if you ride in an exoskeleton all the time, muscles atrophy.
Yeah.
So kind of like that. Okay, let's wrap it up. So I want this bottom line: AI isn't enemy of your intelligence. So
it depends on how much clickbait you want to.
Some people it is.
Yeah, but the key, you put a question mark at the end, and then newspapers do this all the time. Is the world going to end? Question mark. Right?
Yeah, I'm just asking the questions. Yeah. And okay, my final advice to you: feed discipline to your artificial intelligence, to your models, to whatever you're doing. Feed verification, feed transparency, and that's what you will grow. The choices is always yours. I hope you learned something new from these episodes, and I will put all the links the article, the studies that we discussed with Paul today in the description. Go read them. Don't just make Grok summarize this for me. You actually read them, and make sure to be subscribed. We have so many more to discuss later. Make sure to be subscribed on our podcast, MKDev newsletter. Links in the description. Thanks for coming. Thanks to you, Paul, for joining me today.
Could I leave with one final thought from my side?
Absolutely.
So you reminded me of actually one of my favorite. It's kind of the concluding wisdom of Voltaire's Candide, and it's this character Pangloss who's had a horrible time of things. I won't go through all the horrible things that happen. He's super optimist, and then bad things happen. But his final advice is what I think I try to follow. Of course, you have to keep your bosses happy too, and that's cultivate your garden. And I think if you're using this tooling to cultivate your garden, to expand your mental capabilities, maybe offload where it makes sense. I think that's the goal that we have as developers, data scientists, engineers.
That was beautiful. Thanks all. We will hear and see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The cloud tech industry is evolving so fast. Do you keep up with it by improving your skills or upskilling your team? At MKDev, we offer a variety of workshops for just that, from the basics to expert knowledge. Before delivering our workshops and training sessions, we carry out a detailed assessment of each participant. To make sure the workshop is helpful for you and your team, we will add more content to it or throw out what you already know. Or we create a custom workshop specifically for the needs of your team and the specifics of your project.